Hello, everybody. Welcome to the 68th episode of Manor Podcast. I'm your co-host, Roger Bodee, joined as always with my best friend and other co-host, Michael Hamilton. Michael, I did it. I wasn't the most toxic person in Flesh and Blood Twitter this week. I did it. Yeah.
I'm proud of you, buddy.
I'm not number one. I'm not number one.
Though I did see some shots fired at Matt Folks on Twitter. That was this week.
That wasn't toxic. That was all in good fun.
Okay.
This you isn't toxic, you know.
Okay. If you say so.
I DM'd him personally, if it makes you feel any better about it. And I was like, come on, man. Like, you can't say my opponent should feel a sense of dread and sorrow when they see they're paired against me in gem fab tournaments and I'm not a heel. Like, like if you're going to play a character that's a heel, it's fine. Like, you know, I play it up. I'm a little bit hammy. I'm a heely at times. I own it. It's cool. It happens. But, you know, you just can't say I'm the nicest person in the world and then do an interview where you say you should be rue the day you were ever paired against Matt Folks. You know, those are just two different things. That's all.
I guess I would say there is a large gap between being the nicest person in the world and being a heel. There's a lot of like space in between those things.
No, it's polarized. You're either Michael Hamilton or a Matt Folks. There's no in between.
Well, anyway, so there was also a lot of drama on Twitter about the UK Nationals, which I feel like we said this last year. There was some drama on Twitter about UK Nationals.
I feel like that's every year since it started.
Wait, maybe it wasn't last year. Was there anything last year? It was the year before.
Whenever Matt Folks won. Speaking of Matt Folks.
That was 2 years ago.
Yeah, that was Breyer. A tunic thing, and then Matt Folks was like, I think I'm going to get banned, and then he didn't get banned, and then here we are. He won a pro tour.
Yeah. Anyway, I guess there was a lot of conversation around a pummel not causing a discard, basically, where neither player kind of like acknowledged that the pummel on hit should cause a discard. Nothing was said. There was a judge sitting at the table. Everything resolved correctly according to the rules. And I think that, like, I know it feels bad to lose a game potentially to a mistrigger. I haven't seen the game, actually. I don't know I know very well what happened because it was talked about so much, but I haven't watched the actual game. But in general, there's a recording of it. There's a judge watching it, and once it gets brought up, there's you know that like the judge community is going to take a look at it, see if they need to update their rules and policy based on what happened in the game. And just in general, doing a witch hunt for a player is not a good place to be. I think, like, I always say the Flesh and Blood community is the best gaming community I've ever been a part of. I do think we go a little overboard with the Twitter witch hunts, and just trust the judge community. That's what they're there for. They're going to investigate. They're going to see if there is any foul play. And if there is any problem, then we'll hear from them. They'll make a post about it, talking about it. We know, like when the Matt Folks investigation happened 2 years ago, they were like, hey, there's not a problem here. And when the Goliath Gauntlet incident not that long ago, the judging community talked about it. I don't know if they made a super public thing, but they decided or ruled that there was no foul play, no intentional cheating, and I think that's what they're there for. That's their job. So yeah, I think it's really important to just kind of let them do their thing. And if you don't have faith in the judge community, it's going to be hard to play the game competitively.
What triggers do you allow your opponent to miss? Like, would you not discard to a pummel?
I think in the top 4 of nationals, if my opponent cast a pummel and I wrote down the damage and then they did not say anything and they drew their hand and I would wait, but I would not personally, I would not say, hey, you pummeled me, I need to discard here. I would I would do the same thing that Jamie did
Same.
in that situation.
I did it.
So
I did it in the calling, or not the calling. It was in nationals. I don't know. It was one of the rounds. Somebody attacked me with a command and conquer. I said, okay. We wrote down damage, and I looked at my opponent, and he said trigger, and I was like, there you go, okay, and then I'll destroy my arsenal. And he's like, well, do you not just have to do that automatically? I was like, no, it's your trigger, you have to acknowledge it, because that was the rules that I had always been operating in. Like, it's your trigger, it's on you to announce it, to tell me what to do. And that was my understanding of the rules. And I had like a small mini panic attack, because like we had like so many different interpretations of the rules flying by based on what people are saying now, like versus like it's a mandatory trigger versus a may trigger versus this iteration of the rules policy says intentionally missing triggers is cheating and things like that. And the spirit of those rules are intentionally missing like your own triggers. Like if you are have like a trigger that makes you lose life or something like that, intentionally
like blood debt, for example.
yeah, like just being like Levy and being like, oh, I forgot all my blood debt triggers. Oops. Like that's cheating. Like that's not a thing you can do. And I think there's even some like room for like with Briar v Icelander, like forgetting your embodiment so that way they can't stop you at the start of your turn. Like that could be considered cheating and things like that. So those kinds of things, like you're intentionally missing your own triggers, is cheating. But there's no requirement in Flesh and Blood to acknowledge your opponent's triggers. And that's kind of for the betterment of the game, because let's say there was a requirement and you and your opponent both had to like remember everybody's triggers at all times or start getting game warnings. Let's say somebody's playing like a Riptide or Rhino or Vincent, or you know, in 5 years from now when there's just hundreds of effects like that create triggers. You now not only have to know what your deck's doing and everything like that, you are also now responsible for being an expert and knowing 100% of your opponent's triggers per the rules, or else you're a cheater. And I think that's kind of like the spirit in which why they don't force people to like know their opponent's triggers, because there shouldn't be an expectation that you know what your opponent's cards do and that you're perfectly capable of playing your opponent's deck with them. They should know what their own cards do, you know?
Yeah, I agree. And I think to add one more thing to that, it would lead to so many cheating investigations. Every time a beneficial trigger is missed, you would have to do a cheating investigation on the opponent to like try to verify that they forgot it too. And that's like also that's hard to get right. Like in my opinion, that is something that it would be asking a lot for the judge community to get right every time someone misses a trigger. Just like, did your opponent know about it? Did they intentionally forget about it? And I do think that the rules existing the way they do, it does take away a lot of that potential for, or a lot of the need for like a million cheating investigations over that, which I think, I think it's pretty bad if it's something that happens in almost every game. Almost every game has a missed, not almost every game. A lot of games have missed beneficial triggers, like a high percentage of them, reasonably more than like 10% of games. And if that was led to a cheating investigation every time, that's just like very demanding on the judge staff to make that happen.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm sure we're going to catch some heat for this, considering the countervailing narrative, or I think a lot of people were very much on the board of he should have discarded to the pummel. It's scummy, not cool to miss your opponent's triggers, but like at the end of the day, it's a competitive card game. Like if we're playing in an armory, I'll discard to the pummel 100% of the time. That's fine, because we're there to get better, or fostering a friendly, casual environment where we're just trying to play the game. But when there's like real prizes on the line, like this could be life-changing money for some people, some contestants. Like when you won $100,000, like that's like a lot to be said. And at the end of the day, if the rules say you're not responsible for remembering your opponent's triggers, and it's a skill in and of itself to like make sure that you have the mental state to be like triggered, that you're not getting carried away with things, like it's just another aspect of the game. And players should go into the games with those kinds of expectations at high level competitive events. And I think a large degree of this was just kind of like a mismatching of people's expectations one way or another, whether people were just like, yeah, of course you shouldn't discard, versus people just being like, yeah, of course you shouldn't discard if your opponent does it. Like, I think it was just like hard, like mismatch of like expectations, and hopefully we can just get more people on the same page.
Yeah, and I will say in my nationals, I had a very similar thing happen where I don't know if it was like camera match against Bravo, but it was against the Bravo that they went Terra Sunder and hit me, and or Terra Sunder and attack with their weapon, and I'm like tanking about what 2 cards to discard, and I'm trying to decide if I want to block with 1 card, then discard 2, or just discard 2. And so I've got these 2 cards pulled to the side of my hand, and my opponent goes, it has Dominate. And I'm like, okay, I wasn't trying to block with the 2 cards. So eventually I'm like, okay, I'll take the damage. And then I didn't immediately discard the 2. I looked at them after I wrote down the updated damage, and they're like, discard 2. I'm like, cool, take the 2 cards I had pulled to the side, just set them in my discard pile. But I did wait for my opponent to say that. And if they didn't say that, I would wait longer, and then I would probably just go to my, or I was planning to just go to my turn. I would maybe check with the judge because I knew there was an update to how trigger rules worked, but I would definitely call a judge over or go to my turn. I was not going to discard the 2 cards without being told to, I guess, because it's my opponent's trigger.
Yeah, and I guess the last thing I'll say about that then is that doesn't mean that we should start encouraging people to be like, okay, you play Terra Sunder and those write down damage, my turn. Like, you can't, like,
yeah, don't do that.
Yeah, that's you can't that's cheating. You should just sit there stoically like you would at any other point in time, and just wait for your opponent to say something. You can't be like, you shouldn't be rushing them. You shouldn't be like, oh, damage, can I check your graveyard? Damage, oh, can I do this thing? Oh, damage, look over there. You know, you shouldn't be actively trying to be getting your opponent to forget these triggers. Like, there's 2 different, like, I feel like some of the conversations just spewed into like, oh, well, since you don't have to remind your opponent of triggers, you can now just trick them and shine a light in their eye and just do all kinds of really other scummy things now because you don't have to, like, I feel like that's just taking things like a step too far because don't agree with what the current policy is, and that's fine. You don't have to agree with the current policy is, but attack the policy on its merits. Don't attack it for some kind of slippery slope argument of what could maybe possibly happen if you want to now start trying to actively cheat in the game. Like, I get it. No system's perfect. And Josh Scott and everybody on the judging team acknowledge that there are faults in this system. But at the end of the day, it's what they think will lead to the best results in competitive games and Flesh and Bloods. And if they didn't think that, that wouldn't be the policy. So like you said at the start of this, just have faith in the judging community that they have our best interests in mind when it comes to high level competitive Flesh and Blood, and that if these issues start to arise, they'll revisit it. And I'm sure it won't be the policy anymore. But as long as it's working as intended and it's not creating any major issues, there probably isn't going to be a need to change it.
Yeah, very well said.
Okay. Main topic. Everybody sucks now.
Wait, what? That's rude.
So Fatigue Briar was kind of interesting. And it kind of led to some questions about like what other Fatigue decks are going to start popping up as part of some questions in the Discord. And as Lexi and Icelander, kind of like these other high power level talented heroes that are capable of like pushing like really high amounts of damage, start to rotate, Michael and I just kind of do like a power level check to see like what decks are going to be kind of like looking at like going forward, and like what the future of the current roster of Flesh and Blood heroes looks like. And who knows, maybe some old heroes will come up and become new all-stars in this lower power level meta.
Yeah, we'll see. I think, are we jumping into heroes?
Let's
individual
go for it.
Heroes?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think, well, while we still have Lexi and Icelander, they're both very, very strong decks. I think Lexi reasonably stronger than Icelander, but Icelander is much less vulnerable to fatigue because the only way you can really fatigue an Icelander is by getting them to either block with their Frost Hexes or Warhorn them away, which is, Warhorn's not a very good card. It's a big ass to include that in your deck, and it's a legendary, so you can only include 1 copy of it. Or I guess if the Rune Blades can play Diabolic. Is it Ultimatum? Yeah. Um, but yeah, Icelander very hard to fatigue. Lexi, much less difficult to fatigue. Lexi is actually reasonably vulnerable to that strategy.
Sometimes Lexi, I guess, like the reason why she's hard to fatigue though is because her damage output, it can be so high. It was obviously a lot higher when she had access to bullseye bracers to kind of like do the endless arrow kind of loops and things like that. It's lowered now, but Charles Dunn did an interview with Fino, and he said basically like what he wants to do with like his fatigue decks, fatigue Briar, fatigue Oldhim back in the day was basically just almost just flip up the entire value of like you and your opponent's decks and say, well, my value, the total damage you have to deal is like all my block value plus 40, and if your attacks don't add up to over that, I just win the game on the spot. And I think that's a really interesting way of looking at it. And it's something I've kind of always thought about like intuitively when playing against decks, like especially old time, where I always said, you can't just look at your hand and then play efficient 4 or 5 card hands like on like average turn cycles into fatigue strategies, because like Charles said, they're just too good at blocking, and then you just aren't getting enough like chip damage in over the game to actually deal the 40 points of damage that you need. You need to be setting up turns that just overwhelm their defensive capabilities on like a single individual turn by taking like setup turns usually. Briar would do like Channel Mount Heroic, or Lexi would try to pitch stack a very specific Rain Razor's 3 of a kind turn in the end game, or Icelander infamously would just kind of go for this Frost X combo. There's decks that kind of, in order to defeat the fatigue strategies, you kind of have to be aware to like not just play your average hands as they present themselves, but you kind of have to start thinking in like, I need to start hitting ceilings in order to like actually like beat this deck. And if you're not hitting your ceilings, you're just not going to beat the fatigue decks. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's very true. And that's why part of why we see decks like Bravo that are like pseudo fatigue. They're usually not hard fatiguing the whole time. They're usually like trying to, like, fatigue is part of their tools, but they're also like, if you take a setup turn in a Bravo and leave them with a 4 or a 5 card hand, you might just not even be able to do anything with your setup turn. You might just take a bunch of damage, and one of his big dominated on hit effects will stop you from doing what you were trying to do with that setup turn.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess that's kind of like what I'm concerned about. It might be like an unintended consequence of the flattening of power level that we're kind of seeing right now. That's kind of a pretty conscious design effort, it looks like, across the past few sets to just kind of like tone things down. Obviously, not everything can be, Tales of Aria and Monarch. We don't need just a million chains and Starvos running around. But I think it's kind of the symptom of having these kind of like untalented heroes mope around for so long now. If you want to get these heroes, eventually rotating into living legend, they kind of had to mope up the format. But it's kind of like with like low powered limited formats, like Outsiders to a certain degree, Welcome to Wraith, when the power level of decks just can't produce the damage they need to actually end games, it just incentivizes fat decking and fatiguing, right?
Yeah, definitely. If your cards are not worth significantly more, or you can't get your cards to be worth much more than 3, you might as well just be blocking for 3 with your cards and swing a weapon, because weapons traditionally have been pretty consistent. A lot of weapons are able to trade or come in for 4 by pitching a card. We saw the Guardians have always had their hammers that swing for 4. This Fatigue Briar has Grasp of the Arknight plus Reaping Blade to make a Rune Chant come in for 4 with the weapon off a single blue pitch. So when your weapon comes in for 4, then, and the average card in the format is getting 3 points of value, then you can just pretty consistently throw into Fatigue by blocking 3 cards and swinging a weapon.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we'll see things like Anathos becoming more of a powerhouse again, just because it's just such an efficient weapon. Dawnblade, when we're already starting to see decks like Fatigue, Dorinthia, Fatigue, Bolton, start to peak up their heads a little bit now that the power level is starting to get a little lower. You have things like the Great Axe, which is annoying for heroes to block and just presents like, just one card, 4 damage, good rate on in and of itself. But also Dawnblade, very good weapon that you can combine with and start to try, like, kind of threatens both, like, if you want to start playing that build up game plan, be more aggressive, it lets you do that. And at the end of the day, it's still just at its floor, 1 card 3, 1 card 4, if you're combining it with like Iron Song versus with that potential on hit. So there's a lot to be said about the rate of the warrior weapons at the moment. But at the end of the day, like, they weren't able to fatigue before because their blocking for 3 or 4 just wasn't good enough to like absorb all the damage that was coming in at them, right?
Yeah. I think jumping back to your Dorinthia thing, Easton Douglas did a really good Dorinthia deck tech on it. That's kind of like where a lot of the Dorinthia talk, that at least my views on the Dorinthia talk came from, where he was like, he plays his Dawnblade. He's like, I am aggro I'm trying to race you. And then once you start committing too many of your reds to block out Dory, because if you don't block Dory, she's really scary. She can snowball out of control. Then he would just hard pivot to a fatigue plan.
Yeah, I really didn't understand how like Dorinthia was like fatiguing people as well until I played like a couple practice games with Dorinthia with builds similar to like Easton Douglas's list, and my opponent was just like, "Oh, I don't have a very good hand. It doesn't really do very much, but I'm scared of all your Dawnblade. Dawnblade has like a counter, and you have more reprise effects or something like that. Here's 4 cards." And it's like, oh, I just took 4 cards out of your deck for no cards out of mine. Oh, I see. I like the fatigue, because if you just do that 2 or 3 times across the course of the game, like, that's 12 cards you've just spewed out of your deck for 0 of mine, plus all the other times you're expected to block and also use your cards to attack. I kind of see how like the fatigue starts looking more and more real from there.
Yeah, and that's how Oldheim, honestly, that's a lot of how Oldheim fatigued in most builds of Oldheim that were not as extreme as Charles Dunn's Oldheim deck from Indianapolis. Most Oldheim decks would be attacking with either Winner's Well back in the day, or like Spinal Crush, Choke Slam, Command and Conquers, and these cards force your opponent to block. Yeah, Okinold too, but Okinold doesn't.
Oh yeah, that one has dominate.
Just damage.
Yeah, that's fair. Forget I said that.
But it does a bunch of damage, and then
Endless Winner is a good one though.
Yeah, Endless Winner is another good one. But when you'd attack with these cards, your opponent would basically be forced to block them, or just take a bunch of damage and still not have a very good turn. So they might as well block them for life total reasons. But again, they block with too many important cards, then they just won't have enough damage left in their deck to kill you if you if you pivot to a more defensive fatigue strat. That was honestly, a lot of my Briar games did come pretty close to fatigue, but when I was playing Oldheim back in the day, but that was most of the time I was blocking with 3 cards and swinging Winner's Well over and over again. And if they just took the Winner's Well, then they were at real threat of dying. And if they were blocking with real cards to block it out, then it means either way their crackback is not as scary, because they're either getting a Frostbite or giving up cards. And that's taking real cards out of their deck. And then you just kind of, eventually they run out of things to do.
Yeah. And there's kind of 2 decks that I'm really eyeing right now that's going to be looking to be the queens of Mopetown, I guess we can look to once these elemental heroes finally rotate. I think there's just 2 heroes that I'm looking at as I look at this hero list that just pop off the page. It's just like, I don't really know what's going to be able to like beat these like very long game strategy of these heroes. First one, Dromai. Setting up the dragons, it's incredibly cumbersome to ask your opponent to like deal with this really go wide strategy, especially like as we see time and time again, dealing like setting up onboard permanents and asking your opponent to just also then spend resources cleaning them up in a longer game. Like cards like Rake the Embers in particular is just a phenomenal card for just pushing damage time and time and time again while asking your opponent to commit a lot of resources to cleaning up the board. So I think Dromai, shockingly, might actually finally become a good hero. Queen number 1 of Mopetown. What do you think about Dromai?
Yeah, I think if the format does look like this kind of fatigue thing, like Dromai is the deck that if you're trying to fatigue, she's just going to set up 20 dragons and kill you. Guardians kind of get a quote cheat a little bit, or have like a lot of resilience to that because they have so many poppers. But even then, that matchup is really scary if you don't have some extra tech of go again attacks to make sure you're able to clear dragons or clear multiple dragons in a turn. So Dromai looking really good if the format does kind of devolve or into a lot of people trying to fatigue each other.
Yeah. Second queen, which is timely, especially with the tools that she gets in Bright Lights, is going to be dash. A pistol dash is just like the pistol is just an incredibly efficient weapon in the longer the game goes. It's just able to push that repeated sources of damage for no cards out of decks. So many block threes in that deck. You get to play out the defense reactions because you're not actually trying to like boost, so you don't care about having mono mechanologist cards in your deck. And just being able to play a deck with just like a million blues, just look to just block your opponent as best you can, play your defense reactions, and then just push this pistol damage turn after turn after turn after turn again. That's why we saw, Dash being one of the pistol dash being one of the best counters to like decks like Oldhim and things like that, or Icelander even, just because in the longer games the pistol value is just too much for them to handle.
Yeah, I kind of push back against Pistol Dash being that good against Ice Center. I think just like Boost Dash just crushed Icelander.
Oh, okay.
Whereas Pistol Dash, a lot of the time you can set up your combo, and Pistol Dash can't really do a lot with 4-card hands if they're on the pistol plan and not the boost plan. So
depending on how fast they set up, though, because it's still a lot of pressure that, if you're not pressuring Boost Dash meaningfully, like that pistol, like if you're just chilling as Icelander and letting them set up as well, they can easily push 9 damage a turn by just going 3/3/3 with 3 pistol attacks. So
right. I'm saying like the first like few turns of the game before they really get set up, then they usually aren't able to spend full cards or full hands that well.
That's fair. Okay.
Later in the game, once they have the item set up, you are not chilling anymore. That's when you are chilling in a different way. You need to get your channels in play. You need to get your blizzards ready. You need to be threatening a lot of damage because you need to take those cards out of their hands. They're not just pistoling you for nine off 2 cards, or
free 9 damage a turn adds up pretty quickly, it turns out.
Yeah. But yeah, Dash has been really powerful because she can present these 2 strategies that are like so like fundamentally opposite of what each other are doing. One is just like one of the most aggressive decks in the game, just playing a bunch of stuff below, or a bunch of stuff that is above rate at the cost of spending your deck, similar to Chain that we saw in the past. And the other option is you can play the super defensive deck with looking to maximize your pistol by playing these items that power up your pistol. And when you spend your first turn of the game playing an item, your second turn of the game playing an item, and then your pistol is just online the whole game for being probably being the most efficient weapon in the game once you get these items set up. That's very powerful and completely polar opposite of what the first game plan is.
Yeah, for sure. Do you think Rhinar gets better into kind of like the mopey fatigue strategies if people are looking to block more? Or do you think the decks, I guess like Rhinar could be a potential good counter to Dromai potentially with a lot of poppers in his deck as well? But I guess I guess if you're Rhinar, you get to play the item hate brute cards and then destroy all of Dash's item cards. Does that kind of put him as like a sleeper pick for the format?
So theoretically, if Rhinar is good, or if Rhinar has the potential to be good, the metagame where people are looking to block a lot and they also have, or some of the decks have items, that is when Rhinar would be a good choice, a good meta call, because Intimidate is very good against these decks that just want to block you, especially if you can stack multiple Intimidates. Rhinar can pitch stack some very scary hands and also has a very efficient weapon, either 4 damage if you're playing the club or 3 damage if you're playing the claws. Usually I would expect the claws if that's the plan, because you're trying to Blood Rush Bellow, claw into big thing, and that just pushes a bunch of damage and you get to intimidate 1 or 2 cards depending on what you do with the Blood Rush Bellow. But I think that in the world where decks are just trying to block a lot and are trying to do these kind of fatigue things, Rhinar is solid. The problem is he still just struggles to hit rate a lot of the time or go above rate. So like if these fatigue decks have a decent amount of defense reactions, they can park a defense reaction in Arsenal and be less vulnerable to Intimidate taking your whole hand or taking most of your hand. And then if they have cards that can offensively use their card, like we talked about the aggressive Dorinthia that pivots to fatigue, then if Rhinar intimidates your hand, but you're able to just spend your 4 cards on offense, then like the Intimidate doesn't matter that much.
That's fair. Or the fatigue deck start playing the other best card in the whole game, Enchanting Melody. Then the Intimidate doesn't matter either. Okay, I see. Okay, he's not.
I
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
think Enchanting
You
Melody is
can't.
it.
Yeah, Reinhardt can't beat Enchanting Melody fatigue. I forgot about that. Okay.
I will say another couple of decks that I think look pretty good in a fatigue heavy field are the two ninjas. I think Katsu with his Kadachis, when Crown of Seed's gone and Rampart's gone, it's really hard to
Well,
efficiently
Rampart's
block
not
out the
gone.
Kadachis.
It,
Sure.
it's there, but
It's hard. It's hard to utilize without
there
Crown
you
of
go.
Seeds. So Katsu is in an interesting spot where he has a lot of tools to fight fatigue. We saw the Mugenshi release line where you could like time snap that even if they block things out, you still get to shuffle a bunch of cards back in. He also has Kadachis that just like chip in. If you're spending a full card to block a Kadachi every turn, you're not going to fatigue Katsu. You're just going to die. So Katsu is in a solid spot, and then Fi is. We talked about 4 cards or 4 damage for not spending a card from deck being pretty good. Fi can kind of consistently do 5 in a late game cycle where you spend 2 blues to you get back a Phoenix Flame on your opponent's turn with a blue pitch, and then you go Phoenix Flame, pitch the second blue, swing with Ember Blade, and then 5 back the second Phoenix Flame to attack for 1+1 from the Shuko. So 5 damage with no card spent from deck. And then Fi is also capable of doing a lot of damage, and the best, or it's 5 plays pretty reasonably above rate if you're not disrupting him at all. So if you're just like trying to fatigue by blocking out, you are going to have a really tough time against Fi.
Yeah. I think interestingly though, between these ninjas and then Dromai, it's still not looking good for our girl Prism in this kind of meta, huh? With lots of go wide, even in the fatigue strategies. Like it's still looking like we're quite a ways away from it being new Prism's time to shine, huh?
Yeah, admittedly, I have not put very much time into New Prism. I think that she just doesn't feel very good, and I think like Dromai is going to be a popular choice at these tournaments. People love Dromai. Dromai is really cool, and Dromai is actually like not the best deck in the format, but a very solid choice. And because of that, and because of how hard it seems like it should be, or it would be to win a game, or how hard it is to win a game if your opponent casts Rake the Embers, I don't want to be a Prism gamer.
Yeah, that's fair. Poor Prism. I guess we look at the other like hero. I was kind of thinking about Bolton for a second, and I was like, maybe Bolton starts to look more appealing too. He definitely has some pretty high ceilings.
Yeah, I think Bolton has high ceilings, and if these quote unquote blocking fatigue decks are trying to block with a lot of attack actions, like that's when if their blocking cards are attack actions, that's when Bolton looks very good because you are just turning on your hero power every time your opponent blocks the attack action, just getting +1, and then like suddenly your hero that usually can play around rate, maybe a little bit above rate, but not as far as the other aggro decks. If your hero power is turned on in 1 or 2 of your attacks every turn, then you're like way above rate. 2 extra damage every turn is a lot.
Yeah, the problem is the decks we were talking about is Dorinthia, no attacks there to turn it on. Dromai, no attacks really to turn it on. And then Dash has always been pretty historically unfavored into Bolton, so that's good for him.
Yeah. One other thing to note is the Sabres combo is also very good into decks that are looking to hard fatigue you. You can set up pretty big turns, especially with Spirit and V, and what's the card called? The one that doesn't see play very often that puts a +1 counter when you attack with a weapon.
Oath of Steel?
Yeah, Oath of Steel. If you combine Oath of Steel with Lumina Ascensions, it's pretty easy to go reasonably above what a fatigue deck can block out.
Yeah, I think having a combo package would make sense. I don't think you still want it to be your entire game plan because the next deck I'm going to talk about, which is the Assassins, I think they're pretty hard to play into Dromai. So I think Dromai is going to be a pretty big limiting factor on them as well. But short of Dromai, the Assassins look okay, especially like if the games are going long, the grindy hitting with 1 or 2 contract cards could be the difference between winning and losing, just kind of banishing the extra cards out of your opponent's deck. So maybe we see that keyword kind of mattering again, as well as like just the kind of natural inefficiencies that come up when trying to block Uzuri's attacks, kind of like Dorinthia's, where your opponent's not putting like 4 cards in front of it for no reason, but when your opponent puts 2 cards in front of a 0/3, like you're just like, oh, okay, cool. Like I'm winning this exchange on like card rate.
Yeah. And I guess the biggest argument against being able to fatigue with assassins is that your weapons are so bad. The spider's bite, the other spider's bite off brands with different shrinking effects. They're all not very good for fatiguing. They're 2 resources for 1 damage, which is pretty mopey, but at least they do have a weapon, and then the contract effects do a good job at pressuring your opponent's deck.
Let me see if I can get this one. Spider's Bite for attacks, Orbido Class for non-attacks, Nerve Scalpel for reactions, and Scale Peeler for armor. Are those the 4?
Those are definitely the 4 daggers. I could not tell you which one does what.
I know those are. I'm just making sure there aren't any more. I know that's the effects. Scale Peeler peels the scales for armor.
Yeah.
Nerve Scalpel. I just reactions. I don't know. Orbido Class is the crazy trippy red and blue because it's so good against those non-attack action sorcery spells. Ooh, and then Spider's Bite.
Yeah. You said assassins plural. Do you think there's any way that you would play Arachne over?
I mean, he makes they make contract cards a little better, right? You get that. You get to anti-pitch stack your opponent, ruin their pitch stack that they're setting up for their fatigue strategy. You know, it's a thing that is probably exists somewhere.
Yeah, I am very skeptical on playing Arachne over Uzuri right now. I think if Arachne gets a couple good specializations in this new expansion slot in the next set, then I'm interested in it. But for now, with their only specialization being Regicide, I think their ability is so much weaker than Uzuri's that you probably shouldn't be playing them.
Poor Arachne. I was going to bring up the specialization thing too. It's just like they get 1 specialization and it's legendary. They have no other like unique cards that they get to play or like specializations. They have 1 unique niche specialization. Come on. Come on. We can't give Arachne anything else around here. No more specializations. We're doing Arachne a little dirty here with this card pool.
Yeah, I'm sure they'll get help at some point. The question is just when will that be?
Yeah. Speaking of help, Riptide still sucks, right?
Probably. Oldham's gone. That was his worst matchup. Icelander's still around. The deck's very hard to beat with Riptide. And I think you're okay. You can build the deck to be okay, and a lot of the other top heroes. Well, sorry.
What a ringing endorsement. I think you could be okay.
Dromai is also very tough. So Dromai being bad, Icelander being bad. Those are the 2 biggest reasons that I think Riptide's probably still not great. But Oldham leaving was a big boon. Unfortunately, he also lost Bullseye Bracer, which was something that he cared about too. I think there is a meta that you can play Riptide in, but if Icelander and Dromai are popular, it's going to be tough.
What about the remaining Runeblades? Let's talk about them last.
So, we're not even going to talk about Levia?
Oh, we can talk about Levia too. Sure, we could. I forgot Levia existed, but yeah. And I guess we didn't touch on Azalea either, but we'll talk about all these heroes. So, Runeblades, go.
Runeblades. Viceroy, I think, kind of sucks right now. I think with Rosetta Thorn, he was okay, but he's so vulnerable to Warmonger's diplomacy that it's probably just not correct to be playing Viceroy.
What about Pummel Viceroy? Can I interest you in putting some pummels?
So you didn't like Belittle Minnowism Viceroy, right? Because it's like kind of high variance.
Yeah.
And they're generics. I think Pummel Viceroy is significantly worse than Belittle Minnowism Viceroy. I think you're doing the same thing where you're like diluting your deck and making it less consistent, but you're not getting as big of a power spike as you get from including Belittle Minnowism in your deck. I'm not saying it's horrible, and maybe Pummel Viceroy is the best way to play Viceroy right now, but I am very skeptical of it being good or being remotely consistent.
What about Arc Knight Ascendancy, Pummel Viscerai? Then you get to pummel your dominate Arc Knight Ascendancy, trigger all those rune chants, and then the pummel damage makes even more rune chants. Huh? Huh?
So I'm going to need a reminder on what Arc Knight Ascendancy does. It's when it hits, you create rune chants equal to the damage dealt.
Yeah,
and it's like 5 cost for 5 power.
And has dominate.
And it has the birthday cake text that it costs 1 less for each rune chant, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the trick is you get 5 rune chants and you play it for 0, and then you have, and hopefully you're pumping it up with like Runic Reckoning and Pummel.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Hmm?
I mean, there could be something there. I doesn't sound remotely consistent to me. And, and I'm not sure the power level is there to make up for the inconsistencies.
Yeah.
But it's not hopeless. Runic, oh gosh, what is this card called? Runic Reckoning. The new pump that I got, I think, does do a lot for that kind of strategy where it's a 0 for 3 that hits any of your Runeblade cards, and your deck's going to be all Runeblade attacks. It blocks for 3. So if you're not going off, you can just block with it where you're setting up to do your thing. I have my suspicions, but it could be a thing.
What about maybe we can do an OTK thing? What's this? Where's this? What does the book do? The anals? Maybe we'd play Anal Viscerai.
I'm not a believer in the book.
You're not a believer in anal.
So I do think that you can't play the old version of Viscerai because like Mauve into Shrill into Rosetta Thorn was good. Doing that with a different weapon is giving up a full damage on all of those turns, and Viscerai wasn't good enough with that plan before, and I don't think that'll change when his weapon gets worse. All this other stuff I haven't explored enough. I don't like. If y'all want to go explore this stuff, great, do it, have a good time. I'm probably going to spend my time exploring some other things like Vincent, who actually I don't know if is fully solved and might be good. There's still a lot of exploration to do there.
That's fair. Yeah, Vincent seems interesting. Pushing that guaranteed arcane damage could be a way to help, hedge your bets against fatigue. You don't have the chain issue where like you're just going to mill out your deck. And if the format's slower, her vulnerability to like falling behind kind of gets mitigated a little bit. It was just like a slower format. So she does some very, 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 very powerful cards and effects. So yeah, she's just, like you said, kind of a question mark in my mind still.
Yeah, and I think like it's still one of the most above rate things to block with 3 cards for 9 or 10 and then send a 1 card Runegate attack for like 6 with an on hit or something. That's you're getting like 16, 17 points of value out of your hand, assuming that you can turn on that Runegate with some other way. So if you have a good way to turn on Runegate, I think Vincent, or if you're able to figure out how to consistently turn on Runegate, I think Vincent's very good. I also think you need to solve the problem of what happens if my opponent's just blocking and they give me a 5-card hand. I think that's another problem Vincent can run into. So fair. I think if you can put it all together in one cohesive package, I still think that hero has some very good tools.
Speaking of consistency, Levia. You want to talk about Levia?
Yeah. So I think Levia is worse than I thought she was. I think clearly.
You didn't win nationals with Levia? That's not what happened?
Not this time.
I basically had like a COVID fever dream where I can't remember what's real and what's not anymore. You didn't?
No, I played Lexi at nationals, who I still think is the best deck and probably will be if she doesn't get touched in this ban and restricted announcement. Assuming she doesn't make Living Legend status, I don't think she's capable.
I don't think she
that.
can. It's after ProQuest season.
I think the meta is going to be Lexi and decks that are good against Lexi, like this Fatigue Briar that lined up pretty well against Lexi.
But Fatigue Briar is gone, so it's going to be Lexi, sure. And then Lexi, and then Lexi, and then I can't think of the last one here. Lexi, that's right. Okay.
So I do think Bravo has some game into Lexi. I think that matchup isn't horrendous. I think that Dromai had more game into Droma or more game into Lexi before Hornet's thing was around, that kind of makes the Ashwing plan a lot worse. I think you can still tumble tie New Horizons, have a good time. if that's your cup of tea. I don't know. I don't know what else is good against Lexi. So that's why
that's future problem, right? We're talking about future problems of how dominant Levy is going to be in the format. Go. Levy is going to take over the format, be the best deck.
So I think Levia's biggest issue is that if you transform into Blasmafet, you're extremely vulnerable to getting fatigued. I think that the hero still is doing some pretty strong things where some of your turns can be reasonably above rate, especially on the back of Scabskin Leathers, which is still the most high variance card of the game, I think, where you're just
not when you're Roger Craps winning dice rolling master Bodee.
I think that the play pattern of your opponent just blocking out against Levia and then you looking at your hand being like, well, the only way to spend 3 or more of these 5 cards is if I roll Scabskins. I have to roll Scabskins here. You roll the Scabskins, and then they're like, well, you hit a 6. I guess I'll block with my whole hand, leak 4 damage, and try again next turn. Hope you have to miss on Scabskins next turn. And that strategy doesn't beat Levia all the time. A lot of the time, your opponent rolls well enough that they kill you. Sometimes they can even afford to roll 1-1 if you're doing this for a while, especially if the blood debt's pretty low at the time. But on top of having the Scabskins variants, you can also just like hit a hand that doesn't turn off blood debt. You only get 5 cards with every hand. Sometimes your 5 cards don't turn off blood debt. I think that the hero is doing some very powerful things. It's just not super consistent. It is hard to imagine building a Levia deck that is quite consistent. You can build it so that when your inconsistencies hit, like when you don't turn off blood debt, you take less damage. You can build it in a way to like try to maximize your ability to use 4 and 5 card hands without rolling Scabskins, so you can try to be hedged against that. You can play Gambler's Gloves, which also helps. But ultimately, the hero is fairly high variance, and on top of that, just having a pretty poor Lexi matchup where Lexi just is more disruptive and does more damage than you is a pretty strong disincentivize. It's pretty good at disincentivizing playing Levia right now. I also think the Icelander matchup is still really tough, where Icelander is doing things that are pretty good rate. She's good at blocking, and sometimes in the late game, you're going to have 8 blood debt, and she's going to fuse an Aether Ice Vein with 2 Insidious Chills, and you're not going to be able to turn off blood debt.
Seems bad.
So I think once the Ice Heroes are gone, there's less disruption, especially disruption that's not in the form of attacking, which Levia is actually pretty good against attack-based disruption. She has very good blocking equipment, and a lot of her brute cards block 3, just not the ones that block 0. Those ones, they all block either 3 or 0.
Yeah. What about Azalea? Sure, she just not a thing because Warmongers.
No, I think Azalea is good. I think Warmongers is very good against her. I think that Azalea, outside of Warmongers, the hero is quite good. And other than losing Bullseye Bracer and Warmongers being printed, not a lot has changed since Azalea was being like a real menace back when she first got Codex of Frailty. So, and all the new pumps and on hits. So, also Oldheim leaving was probably her worst matchup, so that helps too. I think
Bravo would still be quite bad.
I think
Dromai is also quite bad.
I think the Bravo matchup's tough. I think the Dromai matchup is also not great. It's probably reasonably worse after losing Bullseye Bracer. But I don't think Azalea is hopeless. I think she's still quite good against Icelander, and the hero is just doing some very, very powerful things. So if the format lines up correctly for Azalea, she's pretty consistently able to get like 14 plus value out of her 4 cards, even before counting for the on hits, because of Death Dealer's draw a card every turn. And then the on hits just are worth a lot more, or make that worth a lot more.
Here's the real question. Here's the real hard hitting, we're wrapping things up, real question. Does this sound fun to you?
Does what sound fun to me?
This hypothetical, like, low-powered format. Does this sound like it's going to be fun?
I think it would be a lot more fun if Lexi wasn't in the picture, because I think
we're saying once Lexi's rotating.
Oh, once Lexi's rotating.
Yeah. This Lexi-less Fatigue, Dromai, Duranthia, Dash, best decks. Does that format sound good to you?
Well, I think it's interesting because, like I said, the ninjas are going to come out and punish the fatigue decks. Both ninjas should be pretty good against fatigue when the fatigue decks aren't having Earth React and Crown and stuff. I think Dromai also is quite good at punishing fatigue, and Dromai has a pretty bad ninja matchup as well. At least traditionally has had a pretty bad ninja matchup. I'm not 100% sure that that's still the case, but I think that I'm just very ready to see Lexi go. I want to explore a format without Lexi's like
That's fair.
power on it. I think Icelander, I'm going to be sad when she Living Legends, but she's also very close. And I think she does do a lot of, at least when Icelander is one of the better decks, it does make a lot of heroes much less viable because they struggle into Icelander. I am a little bit worried about a format with no ice at all, but because I think the aggro decks should be pretty strong when they don't have to worry about ice disruption. But we'll see, because it sounds like a lot of the hard hitters are not the aggro decks that we're worried about in the next format. So I'm looking forward to Lexi leaving. I think that there is a lot of room to explore. I think the format will be very open, and yeah, seems like a good spot to be.
I guess I'm not just super excited about a mopey format. I guess like there's nothing that's popping off the page that seems amazing. Maybe I'll change my tune if I'm like starting to win games consistently with Bolton. Maybe then I'll be a happy camper if he's finally good. But I think more importantly, James White just did an interview with Flake over at Instant Speed, and it was a really good interview. Lots of really informative things came through with it. I think the biggest thing that I was most excited about after out of all the things in the conversation was he said that they want to speed up the living legend process and start rotating in heroes a little bit faster. And I think that will go a long way in helping metagames feel more fresh, active, and dynamic, because, you know, we still have every single Welcome to Wraith and Arcane Rising hero legal at the moment. Like all 8 of those original heroes have been around now for the 4 years that Flesh and Blood has existed, and they're like sort of close, some of them maybe, to kind of living legend. I think Dash is the highest one, because it won a couple callings, but like that's it, you know. And I think the sooner we can kind of get the old mope guard kind of swept out of here, the more we can start having more fun and engaging dynamic heroes kind of come and enter in the mix. But I think we're kind of feeling the effects of them going back and introducing the lower power level heroes in those first couple sets to introduce the world to the game. You know, maybe that wasn't necessary, maybe it was, but then coming in with the Monarch and Aria heroes after that, like it's just clear that talented heroes are just far and away better than the untalented heroes. And it's just kind of been creating this lopsided metagame where it's just like talented heroes were cool and interesting when they first came out, and now it's just like, okay, now they're just the best thing to be doing, and we have all these mopey heroes down here. It's kind of led to this polarized metagame for what feels like 2 years now.
Yeah, I don't know if I would completely agree with that. I think like the Tales of Aria talented heroes were all like really, really good and reasonably better than non-talented heroes. But if you even look at Monarch, like there's arguments to play Dorinthia over Bolton, there's arguments to play Rhinar over Levia. Even though Levia and Bolton both just got like pretty big supplemental, or
sure, but you also had Chain and Prism, I guess, for the other two heroes. So
I don't know if the issue is inherently talents versus like when you give the talented heroes better abilities and a bigger card pool, then they're just going to be better than the non-talented heroes. Like if you look at Chain's ability and compare it to Viscerai's, well, Viscerai's ability is actually pretty good, but Chain's ability was broken. If you look at Prism's ability and compare it to anyone, well, Prism's ability wasn't very good, but her weapon was the best weapon in the game.
Yeah.
So
and Briar's originally build ability was broken. So
Briar's ability very good. Lexi's ability also very, very good. And then Oldheim, I think his ability is probably the weakest of the three Tales of Aria heroes, but he also had Crown of Seeds and Stalagmite and a huge card pool and Winter's Wail. So
yeah, all good cards. Well, I guess we'll see. But I guess that's just kind of my thoughts. I just want to see kind of things go a little bit faster. So now that James White said that that's looking like it's going to be the case on the horizon, I'm excited for it.
Be really cool to see some points assigned to heroes other than first place at some of these bigger events.
It's the COVID coming back. Not hinting at more living legend points being assigned.
Yeah, but we'll see. I am still very excited for Bright Lights. We didn't talk about Limited at all in this episode, but I'm really excited to see what Limited looks like there. And hopefully the CC format's pretty good. Hopefully Lexi gets
touched a little bit.
What's up?
Teklevosen. We got to rate Teklevosen. How do you think his ability to play Evos as a once per turn instant is going to play? Do you think that's going to be a powerful Evo ability? Do you think it's going to cause a lot of evolution to the format?
I think the instant speed doesn't matter so much as the playing them from Banished. I mean, the instant speed is upside, but playing them from Banished is quite strong. You're just adding cards to your hand. Basically, you're just getting an extra card every time you do that. So I do think it really depends a lot on how good the Evos stuff is. Like competing with Tunic and Teklo Foundry Heart and Crown of Providence and some of these very good equipment is going to be pretty tough. So if the Evo stuff just doesn't end up like, it needs to be good enough to warrant jumping through these hoops to get it, choosing this hero instead of one of the other mechanologists that get some other benefit. So I think he's in a tough spot to start where the current equipment you get access to is very, very good. But I think if these cards are good enough, then the hero is pretty cool and could be pretty powerful.
That's fair. I guess we'll see. And there's even a third mystery hero, and who knows what that guy's going to do, or girl, or them, or whatever it is. It could be a robot. I don't know.
Is it confirmed that we're getting the same dash that we have already? We're not getting like a Starvo dash?
I think we're getting a new one, but I think so. I think we're getting a new dash.
Okay, so we don't know we only know what one of the heroes from that set does. So we'll see.
We don't even know what that does. The thing that it does.
Yeah, we know the text of the ability, but we don't know how it interacts with specific cards because what the cards that exist in the format are matters so much for how good that ability is.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the next time you're figuring out what the cards in the deck do, always remember, mind your manners.